People are screaming into telephones, papers are flying everywhere. You look around the New York Stock Exchange as chaos ensues. Two people run directly into each other, sending the memos and sales orders they're carrying into the air. The important documents float down to the ground like delicate snowflakes, only to be trampled a moment later by businessmen running for the door. "All is lost," someone yells. "This is the end," a banker shouts from the mob trying to escape the mayhem. Black Thursday is upon you. The Great Depression is in full force. The closing bell rings. Stock trading comes to an end on Thursday, October 24, 1929. Sweat pours down your face as you wipe your brow with the back of your arm. Your fingers are torn, blood trickles from the hundreds of paper cuts you received while making deals and exchanging documents. 12.9 million shares were traded throughout the day, and your sales only made up a minuscule portion of it. You tried to buy low and sell high, but the high never came. Prices of stocks just kept plummeting. You stuff your documents into your briefcase and exit out onto Wall Street. You need a stiff drink. Unfortunately, it's the time of Prohibition and alcohol is illegal. Time to go to a speakeasy. You walk into a barbershop. "Hey Bill," you say to the man cutting your hair. You give him a polite nod. He frowns at you and your overstuffed briefcase. Bill knew what was coming from the stories the Wall Street guys told him during the haircuts. He made a wise choice and sold his stocks a few weeks prior to the crash. Bill didn't get the best return on his investment, but at least his money was out of the stock market. You walk past the row of barber chairs and enter the phone booth at the back of the shop. You dial 1933 and wait. There's the sound of a bolt unlatching, and the back of the phone booth opens up to a dark, smoke-filled room. Businessmen sit at the tables in the hidden speakeasy, smoking cigars and drinking bootleg liquor. Everyone needs a drink after the stock market crash today. Unfortunately, things were only going to get worse. You sit at an empty table alongside the hardwood wall. As your body relaxes into the chair, you let out a heavy sigh. You signal one of the servers that you're ready for a drink. As you wait, one of the gangsters that owns the establishment makes his way over to you. He saunters up to the table with a big smile on his face. Business is good for the crime bosses during this time. They're making huge amounts of money off of bootlegging alcohol. They've also been loaning out money to those in need of it. The gangster stands over you, the smile never leaving his face. "I heard it wasn't a great day at the stock market," he says. "Don't forget, payment on your loan is still due at the end of the month, with interest." The gangster places his hand heavily on your shoulder, showing he means what he says, and there will be consequences if you don't comply. Like so many others during this time, you're in a desperate need of money to dig yourself out of a financial hole. Seeing themselves as good businessmen, the crime bosses use your desperation as an opportunity. They increase their enterprises in loan sharking and labor racketeering, basically what the banks were doing but under a different name. And when the banks did it, it was illegal. Since half the banks are closed in the US, you need somewhere else to get a loan. Gangsters have been picking up the slack. They're happy to loan you money with unbelievable amounts of interest, of course. After your unpleasant conversation with a gangster, your drink arrives. You spot one of your fellow bankers entering the speakeasy. You signal him to come sit. He plops down in the chair across from you. "What happened today?" you ask. "Black Thursday," the banker responds. He reaches out and snags a shot of grain alcohol from the tray of a server walking by. He downs it in one gulp. "That stuff will make you go blind," he warned. He looks at you, reaches down, grabs your drink, and knocks it back. "Worse things could happen," he says. And worse things did happen. The Great Depression touched every life in the United States and caused people all over the world to suffer. It was a time of unsure futures and loss. What happened? What caused the stock markets to crash and the American way of life to crumble? How did 15 million Americans lose their jobs and nearly half of the country's banks fail? Like many economic disasters, there were several different reasons. The decade before the Great Depression was given the name the Roaring Twenties. Things were good in the US. World War I was over and the economy received a nice boost from wartime production. US businesses expanded rapidly and the country's wealth more than doubled during this time. Business was good and everyone wanted a piece of the action. Citizens invested in the stock market. Whether you were a railroad tycoon or just someone working on the railroad, you put your money into the stock market. Money poured into the New York Stock Exchange. Everything was great until it wasn't. The agricultural sector had fallen behind and began to collapse during the 1920s. The average businessman and factory worker had no idea that farmers were struggling to keep their land and maintain crop production. But the failings of the agricultural sector started to lead to higher prices for food. Even with these high prices, the farmers couldn't keep up. They started to panic, but the government didn't want to hear it while the economy was doing so well. Maybe they should have listened to the farmers a little more closely. Politicians were not the only ones living on cloud nine. Banks were giving out loans like money grew on trees. The government wasn't regulating them, so they were free to give and take money as they pleased. Bad investments were made, but who cared? There was always another opportunity right around the corner. Unfortunately, working wages had not kept up with the huge profits the banks and corporations were making. People started to borrow and borrow and borrow. They would spend the money banks gave so generously out, but had no way to repay the loans and the hefty interest that went along with it. Money kept pouring into the stock market, but it was money that the buyers didn't really have. Stock prices were inflated and in excess of their real value. Then it happened. Investors and consumers got a glimpse of what was on the horizon and lost confidence in the stock market. Everyone wanted out all at once. That is when Black Thursday and the subsequent crash of the New York Stock Exchange led to the years known as the Great Depression. The United States was not the only country affected by the stock market collapse. International trade was still recovering from World War I. Many European countries relied heavily on American sales and investments for income. They also owed the United States huge sums of money in loans that had been given to help Europe rebuild after much of the continent and the people living there were ravaged by the war. The United States needed money. Europe didn't have any to give, and the money the world was making off the lucrative United States stock market went to ashes overnight. The world economy was on the brink of collapse. But what about you? What about the average citizen? What was life like for someone who had invested heavily in the stock market and lost everything? It was not pleasant, to say the least. You return home after another long day of looking for a job. You are covered in dust and sweat from walking since sunrise. You've gone to every open factory, but no one needs more help. Business is not booming, and they already are at capacity for workers. This is the story that the average American citizen was told when looking for work. Even manual labor jobs are hard to come by, and when you do find one, they pay pennies. The government had been creating public works jobs and employing thousands of people, but even the government doesn't have enough money to pay their workers, and layoffs ensue. When you aren't looking for jobs, you're standing in line for soup kitchens. Everyone is hungry. Relief organizations cannot secure enough food because of the failing agricultural industry. The lines for soup kitchens span city blocks. Even if you wait in them an entire day, there's no guarantee they'll have any food left when you reach the front of the line. Massive marches are organized to force greedy bankers and the government to provide more public services. Protesters set up camp outside the government buildings because they have nowhere else to go. Everyone needs support, and those who still have money are not willing to let it go to help the common person. Unfortunately, poverty and hunger are not the only things to plague American citizens during the Great Depression. Disease, such as tuberculosis, goes unchecked. The healthcare infrastructure in the United States is underfunded, and there are not enough trained doctors and nurses. If you get sick, you either live with your illness or you die. There is little or no hope of getting help. The winters are cold and harsh, causing vast numbers of homeless and sick people to freeze during these months. Life expectancy and birth rates drop because there just aren't enough resources to support the elderly or newborns. It's a time of tragedy in the family life of United States citizens. You and your family begin to pass the time by going to weekly shows. Every Sunday, Shirley Temple plays on the big screen. If the show is not free, you can always just sneak in. The community tries their best to support one another, and if someone falls ill, others try to help in any way they can. This could be something as simple as giving pieces of coal to warm up an apartment or handing over a few cents that might be spared if they're lucky enough to have a job. Life is hard during the Great Depression, but people will band together to try to get through it. Without the support of the community, no one will make it. Not all populations were affected in the same way. Although there were some wage policies put in place for white working men, black men were not afforded the same treatment. Farm and manual labor jobs that black men worked at had no minimum wages. Therefore, when times got hard, business owners could drop the wages to unlivable levels. But people had to work even if it was for next to nothing. Black communities were not given the same relief packages from the government as white communities due to discrimination practices with local governments. Despite all of this tragedy, there was a beacon of light on the horizon for black citizens. Under the Roosevelt administration, there was what came to be known as the Black Cabinet, led by Mary McLeod Bethune. Bethune was a champion for racial and gender equality. As Roosevelt's Director of Negro Affairs of the National Youth Administration, she ensured that every New Deal agency had a black advisor on it. The number of African Americans working in government tripled under her leadership. Civil rights still had a long way to go, but it was through Bethune's passion for equality and hard work that strides were made during the Great Depression to make the country more equitable for everyone. There was one group of Americans who actually gained more jobs during the Great Depression. The number of employed women rose by 24%. The marriage rates during the Great Depression decreased by 22%. Nobody could afford to date or start a family without money or a job, and this in turn led to large amounts of single women looking for employment to support themselves and their families. Jobs available to women such as nursing, teaching, and domestic work were still in demand. The messed up part of the system, though, was that the government's wage code set lower wages for women than men. By law, employers could pay women less than men for the exact same job during this time. Unfortunately, although these wage codes were abandoned and now everyone under the law should receive equal pay, remnants of these policies from the Great Depression still plague working women in America today. Toward the end of the 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his New Deal policies began to restore the country to normalcy. Relief packages and regulations allowed the banks to begin to recover and companies to provide more jobs. Then World War II began. Wartime is always lucrative for the United States industries. Businesses ramped up wartime production. This created more jobs and money. Funds from abroad began to flow into the United States economy as foreign nations paid for equipment and products to fight the war. It is sad in a way that war leads to profits, but it may have been what saved the United States from the Great Depression. The 1930s were a rough time in the United States, to say the least. There were practically no high-paying jobs, and the average American lost everything. Without the support of community and relief organizations, millions more would have died. The Great Depression should be a warning that loose regulations and poor government oversight can lead to disaster. Until recent events, the United States economy was growing rapidly. It is eerily similar to the growth that the stock exchange enjoyed during the Roaring '20s. It may be time to take a step back and make sure that banks and businesses are following sustainable practices. Economic growth is not necessarily a precursor to a stock market crash, but it is always good to make sure that stock prices actually reflect the true value of companies, instead of an inflated value. Unrealistic stock prices could cause the stock market to pop and crash in the blink of an eye, as it did on Black Thursday. Now go check out Worst Days in the History of the World and why winning the lottery is the worst thing that can happen to you.